welcome to our SESI Talks, which are part of the project WEP Workers and the European Parliament. Today, we're really happy to have Dr. Marta Pilati, which is a policy analyst for the European Policy Center. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you.
So Marta, our project is to bring the European Parliament activities closer to the workers and to the citizens in general. We know that you actually wrote a discussion paper, which is about the national recovery and resilience plans and are they empowering the green and digital transitions? Can you give us a brief presentation of the main findings that are in the paper?
Hello, thanks for having me. So this paper looked at the draft recovery and resilience plans, how they initially included measures for the green and digital transitions, and how they took into account secondary effects, notably on economic, social, and territorial cohesion. Very briefly, we find that structural changes, clearly including the digital and green transitions, can have a disproportionate effect on vulnerable actors. And this is true from a social perspective with disadvantaged groups, but also from a geographical perspective with disadvantaged regions and areas. And it's also true from an economic perspective, for example, when it comes to low-income groups and the unskilled workforce. So it is important that the recovery plans put forward a comprehensive, well-thought transition and development strategy that accounts for indirect effects and that targets most vulnerable actors. So our analysis of some of the plans, which took place in the past few months, shows that this is to some extent done rather well, at least on paper, but that the details of effects and interlinkages among measures could be developed further, and that there could be a stronger impact assessment, for example, when it comes to the indirect effects of the measures on territorial and on social cohesion.
Absolutely, and we know obviously that everybody now is focusing on green and digital transition is going to be what is going to impact workers, I think most in both in the present and in the future. What do you think is going to be the risks for the labor market of this transition?
Clearly, I think that any structural transition generates winners and losers. And this is also the case for the green and digital transitions. Clearly, they will generate a lot of new opportunities also in the labor market, so well-paying jobs and growing sectors. But we should also be aware that there are distributional effects that might impact more heavily those that are more vulnerable. I'll just give a few examples of how this can impact the labor market. The impacts, for example, of the technological change are stronger on low-skilled workers. And this is an estimate of the OECD, for example, that 1 in 5 low-income jobs is at risk of automation, while this is only 1 in 10 for high-income work. So there is a real need for workforce retraining to allow workers to move between different job profiles, and this will be increasingly needed when it comes to the low-skilled workers. Another example is when it comes to the gender dimension of technological change. We know that the fastest growing and better paying sectors are male-dominated. So these are, for example, those require digital skills, the use of new technologies, and all those jobs that are related to STEM skills. So technical, engineering, maths, science-related skills. And this might exclude women from the benefits deriving from this ambition. So it's very important to also focus training and education policies on this dimension. And the last example, for example, is that there is also an issue if the jobs that will disappear or that undergo deep change. I'm thinking, for example, of the industry that are very energy intensive. There is an issue if these jobs are strongly concentrated in some geographical areas. We should not assume perfect mobility of the workforce. So we should not assume that workers can just move freely across cities. And so instead, we should put in place retraining policies so to avoid, let's say, geographical bubbles of unemployment. So that's another example.
Absolutely, and that is one thing that us as trade unions also want to promote and help out and bring out to the social discussion the need for long life learning, especially for the workers when while they're working, and a better transition from school to the labor market. What do you actually think that could be done at European level in order to protect workers during this transition? We said, for example, long life learning, reskilling. Do you think maybe a targeted social protection scheme for those jobs that maybe are obsolete right now, could that be helpful to help those workers that may lose their job?
I think that we should also be careful with what are the competences at the European level, but surely there is a role to play for the EU to push and incentivize member states to put in place retraining policies, for example. When it comes specifically to the recovery and resilience plans, here the Commission has a role to play indeed.
Yeah.
And I think that what's important is that the Commission's assessment should look really at how comprehensive the measures for the transitions are. So it's important to have a thorough impact assessment to analyze whether some reform and investment, for example, are concentrated in some sectors or some areas, or are detrimental to some sectors or areas. And there is also need to ensure that these strategies are accompanied by active labor market policies to ensure, of course, like we said, that the right skills are put in place. And the Commission here has a role to play when it comes to assessing the plans and advising countries on how to do that. And I think that at least on paper, this is done rather well in the recovery and resilience plans. So the plans are looking at different interlinkages between policies, and they present a comprehensive strategy. So this is, of course, a list on paper, which is where we are now. So something that is important is clearly implementation of these measures by the national governments in the next years and months. And we shall see how they take into account this kind of risks.
Absolutely, because then, as it happens with any structural changes, we're going to see the impacts later on in the future. And with that, I hope that maybe we could update each other again further on with another short interview if you're available.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your contribution. It was very interesting. And thank you all for watching. And I hope to see you soon.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.